Hello everyone, my name is El Parnaso and in today's video we're going to jam about Pot of Sloth. So don't forget to leave a like, subscribe and share the channel with your people so we can grow. Also remember that I will still be updating the best jamming masterclass with the information that I used to win the national championship and almost go to Worlds making top 8 at the Continental Championship. It already has over 5 hours of content that will become eventually 6, that will become eventually 7, and eventually will be even 8 hours at the end of the updates. So all of that just for $20, and by the time of you watching this video, the August updates will include a section about Pot of Sloth. So let's begin. I think that is very important for whenever you're trying to understand a new card, especially one card that goes directly against one of the eternal actions of the game, right? In this case, the poetry of the pots that has been with us like since the beginning, right? And try to make two different understandings of the card. One understanding of just analyzing the current top deck and how this card try to goes against that deck, and how in the way of going against that deck is making assumptions of how the game has been developed during the last years to the point of today. So first we're gonna do the review of the current format to understand the Pot of Sloth. We are going to literally understand every single aspect of Pot of Sloth thanks to this analysis. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about, draw cards. This is very important because yes, usually all the pots draw you cards, but the last pot didn't. Pot of Prosperity didn't draw you cards, right? So why are we going back to the idea of drawing cards? Not only that, why are we going for the idea of drawing cards and then without letting your opponent know which ones, place card from your hand to the bottom of the deck? So obviously this is going around the idea of the Kultun cards, especially Rotary, Q, where is this other? Kultun Arrest, I'm just gonna put it there, Kultun Arrest, and the Salem. Why these cards are important? First, let's go for these ones. Kultun Rotary and Kultun Q are both cards that are basically the main disruptions or one of the main disruptions of the Kultun deck. Why? Because you need to consider as a disruption the perfect hand knowledge that they are getting. How they are getting that perfect knowledge? Rotary at one specific point allows you to look at your opponent's hand, and the Kultun Q allows you to excavate the two cards from the top of your opponent's deck, banish one and place the other one on the top or bottom. And usually, I don't know about you, but I have never faced a Kultun that put the card that they saw in the bottom. You know why? Because they value more the perfect hand knowledge. So I'm pretty sure that you let me know if one of your opponents put the card at the bottom and why. That will be funny. So in the comments, you know. So regardless of that, these two cards implies perfect knowledge, perfect hand knowledge, right? Like we can all agree on that. So because of this, it's very usual that the few interruptions that they have are higher quality thanks to that perfect information. So Pot of Sloth is a lot more understandable when you see and consider that by you drawing cards, yes, they saw that you have the slot, but if the slot is resolving, all of the hand knowledge is basically lost, in the sense that you don't know now what cards are they drawing and you don't know what cards are they putting back. And that takes all the way back to the advantage of the one activating the slot, in the sense that they are getting back the chance to bluff and to make mind games with the lack of information from your opponent. You can make bluffers and mind games even with your opponent having perfect information, but you are more limited than you will be if your opponent don't have that, right? So thanks to these two cards, we can already understand why the new pot needed to draw cards and to put other ones back. Because it is important, because the development of the pots, we're going for adding instead of drawing, right? So that is why the Sloth is coming back to that idea. Now, another thing that we need to understand for the pot of Sloth, before leaving the kill tunes alone, is this part right here. For the rest of the turn after this card resolves, you cannot activate pot of Sloth in this. Like, what is the big deal with this? First of all, is a very different approach for the other pots that we had. Like, for example, here, these two. You can only activate one pot of desires per turn. And this one right here. You can only activate one pot of prosperity per turn. So these ones don't ask for the card to... these ones ask just for the card to be the activation negated. This one has a more specific situation, right? Like, this card asks for the pot to resolve. And what is the difference here? The difference is that if any of these two get their effects negated, because of how Yu-Gi-Oh works, the game state will still consider that pot of desires or pot of prosperity actually activated. They successfully activate the card. However, what was unsuccessful will be the resolving of the card. Neither prosperity nor desires will resolve if your opponent negates the effect. So the plus of the prior pots is just if they got their activation negated, like, I don't know, Baron the Floor, Solemn Judgment, this kind of shit, right? So, but if these cards got negated by, for example, Regulus or Desire, you are only negating the effect, and therefore they can't activate any of these pots if they have another copy. And why then you can realize that pot of Sloth has that advantage. But why? Why they put that advantage of the Sloth? Because of these other Kultun cards, like Kultun Ares and Kultun Salen. Well, because right now Salen is a Kultun card, right? So you can see that both of these cards don't negate the activation of the card. Ares, target one face-out card your opponent controls, negate its effects. Its effects. Now let's go for Salen. You can activate one of these effects, negate the first effect, negate the second effect. You can see that all of these negations are revolving around negating effects. Therefore, if you use any of these to negate the desires or the prosperity, they can activate any other copy of the card. However, if you have two pot of slots in your hand and you are going against Kultun, if they use any of these to negate the first slot, because the pot of slot is not resolving, you can activate the other copy. So now you can understand better why this card seems to have this different phrasing. It's not because Konami just want to make unfair cards. It's because the current context demands for the card to be more useful against the the most popular deck, to have that effect. Because when it comes to hand knowledge and etc., you will hear for a lot of people that it's not that useful or even useless to have two same copies of one card. Now, thanks to Pot of Sloth, you have a power spell that will reward you if you have two copies of it, because now they basically can use their negation in the first one. But if they don't, that other copy of the Pot of Sloth that you have will be fodder to go put back in the bottom of your deck, and you still will have just new cards. Like if you only had one Pot of Sloth, but you had two at the end of the day, and you were rewarded for it. But you are only rewarded for it thanks to this phrasing and thanks to these cards negating the effect. So you can see how by making this review of the current deck, of the current most popular deck, you can understand a lot better why Pot of Sloth is having these specific interactions. First, coming back to drawing cards instead of adding, and asking for the card to resolve, instead of asking just for the card to be activated. Everything, every single Yu-Gi-Oh card that has ever been printed can be analyzed just like I'm doing right now. You just need to make the effort and the investigation at the end of the day. I think it's very useful to do this every single time with every card if you are available to do it, right? Or you can just subscribe to El Parnaso so El Parnaso can do it for you. So there is another part of the test that we still need to review, but I needed to use the Kultun cards just to understand the draw and the resolving part of the card. Now, the other part is very interesting to understand, and I think it implies a lot more of historic context for the Sloth to be understood, which is the part that I in purpose try to ignore. Equal to the number of cards your opponent controls. Now, why is such the phrasing like that? It's not asking for cards your opponent has on the board and in their hand. It's not asking about all that kind of weird shit. It's just asking for cards your opponent have on the board. Now, this assumes that your opponent end board is going to have a lot of different cards, right? Which has not always been the case in Yu-Gi-Oh! There has been cases back then in some years before that you can make all of your fucking combo just to leave 2 or a maximum of even 3 cards on the whole board. And usually those were just monsters. And monsters, because if you make a historic review of Yu-Gi-Oh! You can see that for a lot of years the game was very centered about just monsters. Like the end and the beginning of Yu-Gi-Oh! Were circled about monsters for a lot of years. It wasn't like that though in the beginning of the game, because you need to remember, in order to understand what I'm about to say, that at the beginning of Yu-Gi-Oh! The game wasn't based or focused on monsters. The game was actually focused on spells and trap cards. This is, for example, the Metal Raiders format all the way back in 2002. Well, I added Mechanical Chaser because I think it's more funny to play. Like, technically, this is because for those who Mechanical Chaser was a $200 cards minimum as an OTS ultra rare. Okay? So respect the fucking card. Now, the point here is not Mechanical Chaser. The point here is so you to see how the Yu-Gi-Oh! Game was focused more in power spells and use your trap cards. Now, obviously this changed within the times, and there are cards that can help you to see and understand how this change were happening. For example, all the way into 2007, 2008, the game were already starting to focus a lot more in monsters. And because of that development of using monsters, Konami create Diddy Crow as a way for your opponent to have a more faster way to interact with your opponent, because the monsters were starting to do just a lot of shit that you needed to stop. Therefore, they created a monster that could activate it in turn 0, but just by the benefit of having drawn it already, right? Not only that, but you can see that the attempt that they were making was not based about negating something. It was all about the interaction, right? For in this case, banishing one monster. But then this wasn't enough, because the game started to become even more monster focused. Like, for example, this motherfucker, Substitute. Amazing card, right? And because of cards like Substitute, Diddy Crow wasn't just enough. Therefore, they started to create more hand traps. For example, Effect Veiler. Diddy Crow can't do that much against Substitute, but Effect Veiler beat the shit out of Substitute, right? Like, you just negate the Substitute and that's it. So you can see now that from using monsters in turn 0 as disruptions, now they are using the disruption more focused in negate the effect of the monster. And just by this develop, you can see how the game starts to become more center monster, right? To the point that the Baylor wasn't enough and we needed to create Ash Blossom. Then Ash Blossom wasn't enough and we created Impermanence and we created Gospel and we created, and now we are in the point when we are creating Dominus cards. We go all the way to use again trap cards, but now these trap cards are being available to be used in turn 0. Like, that development is for another video. What the point that I wanted to see now is that the game was focused on monsters. And just by recent years, you can see that Konami tried to change that approach very heavily to go back to the 2002 format, in the sense that we are going back to a format when it's a circulation of monsters, spell and traps, but more focus on the spell and the traps. This started with cards like Nibiru, with cards like Dark Ruler No More, all kind of cards that punish the excess of summon of monsters or having monster negates as your endboard. That is why, for example, Dark Ruler says that neither player can activate monster effects. It don't say no one can answer to this shit. No, it says just monsters, because the scenario were a big monster effect game back in 2019 because of this development that you're seeing, right? And after this, Konami successfully started, well, also thanks to the mulch armies and etc., Konami started to print decks that could play around these new big punishments for big center monsters decks. And now we live in a world when, for example, Yami is focused on the field spells and leave the surprise as part of the interaction. We live in a world where I don't know, like, ignore the deck list, okay? This is very old, but my point, that you can see here that also even Qtun is focused with field spells, is focused in leaving quick spells set as part of the interaction. You can go and even like go for who cares? Like, go for, you can see also that going for the Toon deck in November, we are successfully making that transition because the deck is focused on field spells, the deck is focused on mind scan, a continuous trap, a counter trap, and even in decks that are not that good right now. You can see it, for example, in the Elf Note deck. We are focused on leaving a continuous trap. So you can see what I mean, right? You can see that the game has successfully made the transition to stop being that focused on monsters because of this historic development that I'm trying to make a big and very fast summary. And what that has anything to do of all that yapping with Pot of Sloth? Well, if your endboard is more focused again in leaving not only monsters but spell and traps as part of the normal development of your engine, that means that a natural consequence is you leaving more cards on the field. For example, Yami leaves like 1 or 2 monsters, but they are always leaving a field spell and a quick spell. So you can see my point, right? And now by you making this understanding of Yu-Gi-Oh! Trying to make spell and traps relevant again, you can see why the slot says equal to the numbers of cards your opponent controls. Because a slot is just coming into the game when the format is already successfully doing that approach. And therefore, the slot can assume that all of the current decks are leaving a shit ton of cards on the board. As you may realize, Elf Note, Yami, Qtun, the Ritual and Darkness, like all of that shit, right? So, because of the game going back to making traps cards and spell cards relevant again, like Mind Shuffle, Mind Scan, all that good shit is just Konami trying to get back to the relevance giving back the relevance of spell and trap cards in the game, just because of the game, going to other route when you have like decks with 40 effect monsters because of the dangers, for example, right? Like, you get my point here. So now, doing this historic approach of the game, of how the game has been developed and how the game is doing right now with the most popular deck, we can perfectly understand each and every aspect of the pot of Sloth. We now know why the effect involves drawing a bunch of cards. We now know why the cards is allowed to draw a bunch of cards. Now we know why the card is asking for the resolve being negated instead of just the activation. And that is basically it. You can make this exercise of understanding each and every aspect of the effect of a card with all of the cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! You just need to do what I just showed you. Make this development, this academic research, this methodology of investigation, and you will be rewarded by having this information now and understanding a lot better the origin and the text of the card, in the sense of why it's phrased like that, or what the card does, what it does, right? Or you can just subscribe to El Parnaso and he can do it for you, you know? Yeah. So now we understand all the effects of the card. So you can apply the context better, because in the future the new decks will have this into consideration, and then we can understand a lot more why the future cards after Pot of Sloth do whatever the fuck they are doing. For example, Mind Scan, just as an example, right? A lot of people like to complain and bitch and cry about why now my opponent, because why now I must keep my hand revealed at all times. That is so unfair and all that baby bitching, right? Well, it's not that is unfair. It's that the game needs disruptions, new disruptions going first, that can make the Pot of Sloth useless, or at least less effective than it was when the card came out. In this case, one of the benefits that we just explained is that you are going against the perfect hand knowledge that Kultun had, right, against you. Now you can't go against the perfect hand knowledge that the Toon deck will have, because it's not that I am activating Mind Scan, and at the moment of me activating Mind Scan, I am going to see your hand and your top deck, right? No, I'm going to see it at all times. This means that if I have Mind Scan, I will know each and every new draw the Sloth is going to give you, and I am going to know each and every card that you are choosing to put back in the bottom. So you can see, right, how everything is making sense now. And I think it's beautiful. I really love how this goes when it comes to the game, and how you are rewarded by doing this intellectual effort of trying to understand why the cards make what they do. It's all about context at the end of the day. Context and historic reviews. So now that we understand that, I think that regardless of how Pot of Sloth is going to be kind of useless against the Mind Scan, because mind you, another thing that we were talking about Pot of Sloth is the chance of you being rewarded by drawing multiples of the card, right? Like if I draw 2 slots and my opponent use the RS or the Silent to negate one, I still can activate the other one, even though the negate that you are using is an effect negation, unlike the prior pots, right? As we just discussed. These don't work against the future top deck Toon, because Mind Scan also has the ability to declare one card name, and neither player can actually activate that fucking card for the rest of the turn. Which means that you can draw 3 Pot of Sloth whatsoever, and now that I know you have 3 slots, I just declare Pot of Sloth, and you can even attempt to activate the card for that turn. And because Pot of Sloth is not a quick spell, you need to wait for the main phase, which means that your opponent can declare Pot of Sloth during the draw phase or the standby phase, and you are fucked, you know? So you can see the beautiful poetry behind the logic of what the cards do, what they do. I think it's beautiful. So with that understood, like, I think that you will have a better context of Pot of Sloth, and you can see how Pot of Sloth is such a powerful card not only against Kultung, but against basically every deck right now, because the historic development of Yu-Gi-Oh! In the competitive sense has the consequence of all the current decks trying to make disruptions that are also focused on their spells and the traps. In the case of, for example, Yami, we are leaving a field spell and we are leaving a quick spell. And even after siding, we are leaving yet another card, which will be the assist, right? So you can see now how the design of Pot of Sloth was perfectly done by Konami understanding what the top popular deck is right now, which is Kultung, and Konami understanding how they make the development approach for their competitive scene for the last years. Like, I think all is beautiful, rounded, and explained, and shows you how Pot of Sloth was a perfectly good design card. I think it's very beautiful. Now, all of this shit means that you need to just let your opponent resolve the Pot of Sloth when you are a Yami player. I think that you still need to take the risk and the effort of, if you have the Ash or you have the Purge or even if you have the Desire, I think will be worth to try to negate the card because of what can imply, right? But at the same time, it's going to depend of what day your opponent is playing and what you consider is popular in the format. Like, for example, if I am activating Pot of Sloth here, but I don't have neither talents or call by, I just have hand traps that are meant to stop your opponent making the combo. How that relevant the slot is going to be? How that relevant is the slot going to give me cards if the cards that I'm getting are not useful anyways? Like, you can make the argument, oh, it will give you a starter and extenders, but if the end board deals with whatever starter and extenders you may have, or even the combination of those, how is that useful anyways? Like, if I just draw a bunch of hand traps that I wanted the last turn, they are not doing shit anyways, right? However, there's a lot of intricacies there, and I think because you don't know how your opponent is building your deck, and because of right now not having a big consensus of how people are building their decks for big tournaments, we still cannot make an easy conclusion of you on if you can actually afford your Ash or your Purge or even your Desire to not use it against the Pot of Sloth. So I think that at the moment you should interpret this card not only as a way for your opponent to dig their possible board breakers, but also for your opponent to not break. Because what a lot of people are going to do, and what I think is going to be very common, is not only for them to have 3 slots, but them to take out starters whenever they go second for the slot. So is this card, by being also as possible most likely a starter, in the sense that they are using a card to have a better hand so they can actually play better the game, now they have a starter that exposes itself to Ash Blossom and to Purge. Like, for example, a starter like Cookie Yami don't expose itself to Ash nor Dominus Purge, because you can leave your circulation and an SP whenever you get hit by any of these two. But if you replace one cookie for the slot and you have the slot as the starter, now you are exposing yourself for this starter to lose against those possible cards. So that is, some shit to consider. If you want to go deeper about how Pot of Sloth implies in the specific intrication of Yami whenever you are the Yami player, or how your side deck changes with Pot of Sloth in your deck, you give it a shot to the best Yami masterclass, and I'll see you tomorrow.